Hi everyone, and welcome back to the International Festival. Delighted to be bringing this panel together today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to our chair, Arifa. If you don't have tickets to see the performances of You Bury Me, Hindu Times and Lament for Sheku Bayo, there is the opportunity to watch You Bury Me and Lament for Sheku Bayo online later this month, and you can find out more information about that on eif.co.uk. And please feel free to drop questions into the Q&A function below, and we'll catch them later on in the conversation. And I hope you have a really good time. Over to you, Arifa.
Thank you very much, thanks, and welcome everybody. So I'm Arifa, I'm a critic at the Guardian newspaper, and I'm really happy to be here amongst this fantastic panel, and we're going to be talking about plays for today and women's playwriting in Scotland, and we've got, you know, writers, directors, producers with us. So I hope it's, well, I'm sure it's going to be a rich discussion and we can come at it from many ways. So you might know that the Edinburgh International Festival is showcasing 3 new plays by Scottish writers who are all 3 women writers, and this has got you know, people involved in those productions, and it's a conversation about the past as well as the present and the future of women's playwriting in Scotland. We're going to be focusing on 3 productions, and I'm going to quickly tell you which they are. And I'm also going to introduce the very patient panel that's just going to sadly hear me, you know, talk for the next few minutes, just to lay down some of the bare facts. So these plays will be shown at the Lyceum as part of the festival in August, and they're Hindu Times by Jamie Jethwa, and You Bury Me by Ahlam, and Lament for Sheku Bayo. And the panel is very connected with all 3 of those productions. And let's tell you who's on this panel. There's Ellie Kiel, who's a producer of plays and co-founder of the Women's Prize for Playwriting. The inaugural prize was awarded last December to 2 winners, co-winners. One was Amy Trigg, and her play was Reasons You Shouldn't Love Me. And it had an thundering staging, premiering at the Kiln Theatre in London, and astonishing reviews. It was such a success. I went to see it, I was bowled over. Along with that winner was Ahlam's You Bury Me, which we're going to hear about, and Ellie will talk about it, along with another panelist, Katie. Katie Posner's joint artistic director of Plough. She's an award-winning director. She's worked in the UK. She's toured nationally and internationally too. She was associate director at Pilot Theatre for several years, and in 2017 she was nominated for a UK Theatre Award as Best Director. Her production was sorry, My Mother Said I Never Should. It was produced by it was staged at Theatre by the Lake. We have, so welcome you two. And we have Hannah Lavery, who's a writer and director and poet and performer. She wrote an autobiographical lyric play called The Drift. It toured in Scotland as part of National Theatre of Scotland season in 2019. So a year later in 2020, last year, she was awarded a new Playwrights Award by the Playwrights Studio Scotland and selected as one of Scotland's voices for the BBC's Writers' Room. And she's going to be talking about Lament for Sheku Bayo. And just to say that production, Hannah, you'll tell us more, I'm sure, it was produced as a digital film in autumn last year. Some of you may have, it's out there, so some of you may have seen it, but it will be staged this autumn live, this August live, as I say. And finally, we have Caitlin Skinner, who's artistic director of Stella Quines Theatre Company. which is an intersectional feminist theatre company. It's based in Scotland. It provides opportunities and support for career development on stage, off stage, across the board for all sorts of creatives. It also commissions research and campaigns for change. And I really want to talk to Caitlin later about that. She's directing Jamie Jethwa's Hindu Times, and it's an audio play. And it was reviewed earlier this year in May in The Guardian, my paper, and it was given 4 stars. And so go and, you know, so it's these plays, including that one, sound full of promise and talent. Rather than hear me bleat on talk about these plays, I'd like to ask each of you, if I may, about, I suppose, the origins of these plays, how they came about, what they're about, what's striking about them, what's important, and why they really ought to be seen. So I wonder if I can start with, because I mentioned Ellie and Katie are both involved with Arlem's You Bury Me. Ellie, could I ask you, first of all, just to tell me about the process of coming to Arlem as a co-winner, and then perhaps we could go on to Katie to actually tell us about the play itself, given that Katie's the director. So Ellie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, yeah. Yes, well, the first thing to say probably is that we didn't expect to have 2 winners of the Women's Prize for Playwriting, particularly not our inaugural prize. But when the judging panel convened in October last year to judge the final 7 plays, they felt that that You Bury Me and Reasons You Shouldn't Love Me, which was the play that you just mentioned at the Kiln, Arifa, were real sort of bookends of the spectrum of female playwriting talent, in that well, You Bury Me is this big, ambitious, vivid, exciting play with a very large cast, and Reasons You Shouldn't Love Me is exactly the same, but it's a one-woman show. And so that was how the 2 winners came about, and we awarded each of the writers £12,000 and committed to producing their plays in as timely a way as we could with the pandemic, but also in, you know, as prestigious a way as we could. And we were very, very happy to be invited by EIF to bring You Bury Me up for a stage reading. It's set in post-Arab Spring Cairo. Mm-hmm. I think what won it is the intensity of Arlem's writing, and I suppose its universality. Like, it has a very specific setting that I've just mentioned, but the themes that it's grappling with are absolutely universal, in that it's young people discovering relationships with each other and with their own bodies, and grappling with I suppose a very intense political situation at the same time. So it's the big and it's the personal at the same time. Would you say that's right, KP?
I think it's one of those plays that when you read it, and we came across it, we were like, wow, gosh, like.
Have we lost Katie temporarily?
Brilliant political writing, but the university. Oh, sorry, did I?
Katie, will you just stay? Will you just repeat that? Just because we lost you for a little minute.
Apologies. Yeah. So when we came across it, exactly as Ellie said, we were all. I literally remember texting our new work associate, being like, "Bill, have you read this play? Oh my word, it's incredible!" And recognizing, like, this is an extraordinary piece of work. It's political. It's got a great universality. The characters are young. It is so funny and identifiable. And it deals, obviously, it's set in Cairo. It's 3 years after the revolution in 2011, when, you know, everything was set to change. Big progress. New things were going to happen. The state was going to evolve. And what you've got is this brilliant play that comments on that, which has got all the kind of richness of the state. There's a character that's the city that kind of guides us through, and it comments, like, internally within the characters, but it also comments politically about the state. and it's playful and it's joyous. And I just keep going, gosh, having learnt its journey and knowing that this play has been, you know, passed to a lot of people have read this play, and I think, oh no, you missed out, because how lucky and fortunate are we that we've now got the privilege to be able to share this as a stage reading. I'm just in rehearsals right now, and it's going to be an extraordinary piece of work, and all being well, we'll go on to have a big future life because it deserves it.
Fantastic. And Ellie, I remember both of you actually, Ellie and Katie, I remember speaking to you just as you were coming to, before you'd found your winners, and you'd said that the prize had, in terms of, you know, women's writing, had showcased, you know, the bigness of imagination, and this is a play, you know, which grapples with big political themes, but personal themes. So it's the political and the personal, it seems.
Yeah, and I think in that sense it's a perfect winner for the Women's Prize for Playwriting, and particularly the first one, because it demonstrates perfectly that obviously women are capable of writing big plays, and that they should be programmed on national stages and reach wide audiences. And the prize was set up as in response to a feeling in some quarters that wasn't happening enough, and so for that reason I think it's a very fitting winner.
And before I go on to Hannah, there's so much to unpick there, and we will, but I want to go to Hannah and Caitlin in a minute. But I just wondered, and I should know this, is the Women's Prize for Playwriting just for the UK, or is it, you know, is it international? Where people often ask that. It's for the UK and Ireland, and I think in an ideal world we would perhaps love it to be a bit more international, but we're restrained by, or constrained by, the number of people, the size of the team it takes to read all the submissions, basically. And I know that if we opened it to the whole English speaking world, we would not get through everything. Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that. Now, Hannah, I want to come to you. Lament for Sheku Bayo is, I mean, people will know that name and that story, and you know, the fact that he died in Fife in 2015 while being restrained by the police. There's an inquiry out there, and I wonder, it's a big and brave and infuriating, I imagine, a story to take on. Hannah, will you tell us a little more about it?
Well, it's interesting that you say that people know about it, because they don't actually. When I started, well, at least when I started writing it in 2019, it was not something that people knew about. It was not, you would say the name Sheku Bayo and people would not know what that meant, what that name or what it referred to, or who he was. And so for me, I wanted to write, I suppose I wanted to create a space for us to examine not only what had happened, but why we as a country had turned away from it. And I wanted to put it in I mean, I'm a poet, firstly, I'm a poet. And so it was a play. I wanted to use the form of lament. I wanted to create a lament for a couple of reasons. One, because I felt like I wanted to open a space for grief, but also to be within that Scottish tradition and to have keeners on stage, because I wanted to place Sheku Bayo and what had happened to him is a Scottish story. It's within a Scottish context, and we will lament this, and we will bring keeners on stage, and we will keen for him, because what I had felt was that we as a country had turned away from this story. He died in 2015, which was in the aftermath of the Scottish independence referendum. This did not fit our narrative of the Scotland that we wanted to talk about and who we were. We don't, in Scotland is, I would argue, is very behind in a lot of conversations around race. And so therefore we are very tied to the idea that we actually the racism doesn't exist in Scotland. We are tied to the idea of Scottish exceptionalism, and it's very much part of our identity. And so it felt really important to create a lament, to create this poetic space, this grieving, not only to hold on to the humanity of Sheku Bayo, which was lost in much of the narratives that kind of sprung up around him, really racialized narratives that were kind of criminalized Sheku Bayo in his death, that we needed to challenge, but we needed to create a challenge to ourselves, and in that tradition of lament, be that step removed to create something. And also, I suppose, really importantly within this context, I wanted it to be women that speak, because actually the people who have fought for Sheku Bayo have been his sister, his mother, his partner, Colette. And it felt like actually this was what keening in that tradition is women coming together and taking the burden and lifting it up and saying, bring an act of solidarity, but saying, I'm going to create this space where I will hold this, and I will hold it publicly, and I will demand that we share and we come together. And so that it was all within that. But so that's that, you know, and it felt important for me to kind of, for us to suppose to just create a dignity and a place for anger and for grief and for pain. But for me, I suppose, as a woman of colour in Scotland, it was also about saying, I'm actually just this story needs to be told. I'm at my end of us not being honest about actually other Scotland, the Scotland that I walk in and that my family walk in.
And yes. And I will come to Caitlin, but I do want to ask a few questions about this, because it's fascinating. You know, how did the events of last summer impact this specific story? You created a film, a digital film of it in the autumn of last year, when we're still sort of mired by the pandemic. We're pulling ourselves out of it. And I wonder if George Floyd and everything that happened felt at all relevant, impacted in you know, smaller ways or bigger ways. Did it affect you?
Of course, of course it affected.
In the writing,
it created an urgency in the sense that actually, you know, and you know, the family speak really eloquently. Caddy speaks really eloquently about how when George Floyd died, and you know, in some ways very similar to the way Sheku died, the whole world, and where was the whole world for Caddy and for her family and for Sheku? So there was a sense that there was an urgency to get that play and that lament out and to get it out. And I think maybe that's, you know, we created this very early on, this digital piece. I mean, Caitlin was involved too with that, supported me with that. And we were very much in those kind of, how do we do this? But it felt that we wanted to keep, because actually what happened last year, which was interesting, is that people started to know who Sheku Bayo was. We were seeing these, the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests in Scotland, we would see Sheku Bayo's name alongside George Floyd's name. He was starting to be spoken about. So it felt like, well, actually, I've created this work where I'm laying out more of that story, that could be, this is maybe the time for us to put this out while these conversations are still, I suppose, hot. I mean, I think we all know, I'm in my 40s, and I feel like these conversations are quite secular. Like we get to this point very often where we're like, we need to do something. We need to have this big reckoning around race and about what it is, and then everyone gets exhausted, and then something else happens, and then we have to come back to it again. And I'm hoping that it won't. You know, in a couple of years' time, we'll all be sitting down going, "Oh God, we really need to talk about this again." So I think there was a sort of urgency to get it out. But I think But I created, I suppose, a lament in the sense of what it is. And I suppose it is a piece, I feel, that was to be shared within an audience. It had that feeling that, so I'm really pleased that we get to put it in front of a live audience this year.
And you're telling somebody else's story, somebody else's tragedy, and in terms of permission, you know, from the family, do you feel you needed permission, and how was that part of this, creating this play?
Well, I haven't created a biopic, so I have created a lament. So there is a sense with a lament, there's always a step away anyway, that I decided very early on that I was so angry that people were telling me they didn't know about this story when there was so much out there for us to find, that I wanted to create a piece of work which was about, this is what I can find, this is what I found. Of course, and also I didn't want to walk into the front door of this family. I didn't want to intrude. I wanted to write from, this is what you've been campaigning, this is what you've been saying. Let me take all that and create a lament, create this grief, this space for us to talk about why we're not talking about Sheku Bayo. So there was a sense that I wasn't creating a biopic, but saying that, I was also not going to put this, I wasn't going to do this unless I knew that the family were supportive of me writing this. So there was a permission, there was there was that seeking of permission. Didn't want to cause harm. So I definitely sought permission to make this piece, but I didn't, but I took what was out there, and the family came to see it last year's when we did the recording, and it was a really powerful kind of validation of what we've done, because Caddy felt and said to us all that we'd captured what the family had gone through in terms of their fight and their campaign to have people say his name. And I suppose essentially that's what this lament is. It's about saying his name and asking other people to say his name too. And I think that's the key of it. But it's not a play where I've gone in and tried to get special access or to kind of to put their grief on stage. Mm-hmm. It's okay. In that sense, it's a personal response, a poetic response.
So thanks for that. So Caitlin, I want to come on to you and Hindu Times. Sorry you've had to wait so long. It was created as an audio play as part of Pitlochry Theatre and Lyceum Theatre's sound series. And I wonder if you could tell us about it, but also its transition, because it's interesting that it's an audio, a bit like Hannah, first film, then live, and you've got this changing of form too. So will you tell us a little about the deities and I believe the sort of the comic elements of Hindu Times and how that's come about? And
yeah. So Hindu Times is an extraordinary play. It's about a Scottish Indian woman who has grown up on the streets of Dundee, and it's in the everyday beauty of this streets of this city where I am at the moment rehearsing that she finds the divine. So it's really about how you find the eternal in the everyday, and actually sometimes in the darkness and in the dark places. And Jaminie's voice is so funny, so sharp, and comes from a supersonic love for Dundee, particularly for the language and the culture of this city. But it's also an exploration of her culture, of her spirituality, and how she has discovered that and found meaning through a place that feels quite different than her Indian roots. So the play, like Lament, actually, like Hannah's play, was originally a stage play, and then Jaminie had talked to David Gregg at the Lyceum about doing it as a stage play, and then when the pandemic hit, Pitlochry Festival Theatre, where I was working as associate director at the time, and the Lyceum put together a programme of plays as audio works, with the plan that they would always, when we could come back to being live, be made into live plays again. So that's what we did. So in deepest, darkest early January, we worked remotely from our bedrooms and recorded the audio version of the play and developed the script and the characters and the comedy. And now we're in the fortunate position to be able to develop that because everyone loved it. And because, of course, the theatre here in Dundee, the Dundee Rep, love it, and it's right home here. So we're rehearsing at the theatre to make a staged reading of the work to bring to the Lyceum and to kind of to bring it alive and see what all those other elements are going to bring to the play.
It sounds like a many-voiced play, so it sounds like it's got quite a cast. Well,
I think we have a cast of 3. So the central character, who's the Scottish Indian woman, and she meets, she's surprised at her own house party by two guys, two white guys that she used to know, she hasn't seen for a long time, one of whom is a former love interest, and they've been kind of inhabited by someone else, by something else. I won't say too much about it, you'll have to come and see it.
Yeah.
It kind of takes her on a journey that she's not expecting, but one that she really needs. So yeah, I guess it's actually really rich in terms of its philosophy and in terms of meaning, but there's such a vibrancy in the dialogue and the comedy and the fun that it's Jaminie's voice, like, you know, it's really her voice, and that's quite special.
Yeah, and I wonder, can I ask Caitlin and Hannah this specifically, because it's a Scotland question, and Ellie and Katie, I'm aware that you don't live in Scotland. So what did you grow up seeing on stage in Scotland, and what didn't you see? So what was the stuff that resonated with you, if any, but actually, you know, you felt something in absence as well, the things that perhaps you're writing or staging that you just didn't see. So Caitlin, I wonder if I could ask you.
Yeah, I think Scotland has a great folk tradition in theatre. So I saw plays with energy, with ensembles, with socialism. I went to my local theatre in the Brunting, which had it was a small local theatre in a small town, but had a rep company. So it was producing its own work and producing its own plays. So a lot of work in a kind of, a literary Scots language, if you were, like the plays of Littlehawkhead. And then a new writing tradition in the 90s with our kind of goddesses of Scottish new writing, like Rona Munro and Linda McLean, Zinnie Harris, Nicola McCartney. Really strong, clear, good plays, strong pieces of writing from female voices. I would say a lot of that folk tradition, that ensemble socialist tradition, was quite male, always felt quite male to me. And I didn't hear the kind of Scots that we have in Hindu Times. I didn't hear a local dialect. I heard a kind of, I guess I just describe it as a formal Scots or a literary Scots. I didn't hear the language that was spoken on the streets of the town where I lived. And I didn't see I didn't see a huge amount of people of colour or voices. I think we do have quite a male working class voice in Scottish culture, you know, Black Watch, Gagarin Way, like plays. I don't think we have a female working class voice. I don't do that. I think we've had for a long time a lot of companies working in inequalities. You know, Stella Quines has been around for 25 years, and Birds of Paradise who work with performers with disabilities, but I don't know that has always collided with the mainstream. And I think I could say it because I'm from here. You know, you can talk about your own family, that in some ways we are a bit behind other parts of the UK when it comes to how diverse our stages are, and in other ways I think we have this much more liberal leftist tradition in our theatre anyway, so sometimes that feels like a bit of a contradiction.
And so would you say that you saw, because you said you didn't really hear yourself on stage, you know, the specifics of your dialect, and did you intellectualize, you know, growing up, that I'm not there, you know, where's my stories, the stories that I'm living around, or not really?
Ooh. Do you know, I think the big thing for me was feeling that the industry wasn't open to me, because when you talk to people in the industry, it felt quite, it just didn't feel very open. It felt quite quite hierarchical, quite English actually, a lot of.
Really?
So actually for me maybe it was that we were having the Scottish voice on stage, but that the industry didn't feel like it was connected to the community.
Yes, that's really well put. And how about you, Hannah? Hannah, we've lost you for a minute.
I've muted myself.
Oh.
It is a metaphor. No, I grew up going to the panto. Do you know what I mean? I grew up with community my mum worked in Craigmillar, which is a part of Edinburgh, of Edinburgh, and I went to a lot of community theatre.
Yeah.
Those were the moments where I was most sort of blown away and excited. And my mum was worked as a health worker and a nurse, and I went to see a lot of like very political plays where she'd be creating stuff, or she'd be creating with a group of women to make something
Wow.
violence or to talk about. And so I saw some incredible work that, and I think that was stuff that really inspired me, was when actually people got up and found a way of telling their own stories. And my mum was also very involved in the trade union movement. So I sometimes think my first pieces of theatre were going to see, you know, people giving political lectures in the meetings, and those were the things that really stirred me, and going on big marches. And I think that felt very much my theatrical background. Then also every Christmas my mum saved up and we went to see whatever Andrew Lloyd Webber, and we just loved musicals. In fact, around with memories, and because I used to have a ghetto blaster, we'd stop every so often to get batteries, and we'd sing Cats down the so I mean, it's not highfalutin, but then saying that, as I got older and I got involved with Travis Young Writers in the 90s, and I started to kind of be really excited by, but I think I was always excited by theatre that just felt like it was doing something different, or felt like it from the edges, or telling stuff as on the slant, I suppose. And also I grew up in Edinburgh, so I was also, every year I would, was that kid that would walk along and someone would go, come and see this show, and I'd be like, what is it for nothing? And so I spent a lot of time sitting as like one or two, you know, like me, the old guy that came in because it was raining, and just watched. And
a dog, you know.
So I remember seeing in Gordon DeMarco put on, I think there was like a Romeo and Juliet done in, I don't know, it was like an Eastern European company that came to do Romeo and Juliet. I just finished watching the film with Leonardo DiCaprio, so I knew what was happening. And it was amazing. And I had all these incredible experiences of street theatre, of seeing like quite kind of classical plays, but done groups. And but I think but then when I got to university, I think for me, I mean, I'm always excited by poetry and language. So for me, it's always been Liz Lockhead. And it always will be. And the humour and the I mean, I was a teacher for a long time as well, in you know, working in I suppose what you would call deprived communities. And there's nothing like bringing out Liz Lockhead to read to those people and hearing what it's like to hear your own voice. But as Caitlin was saying, there was never me or my family on stage. For me, I suppose it always felt to me Scottish theatre was doing, which was a lot of what Scottish culture does, which is saying Scotland is white. Being Scottish is white. And if you want to find stuff that's not white, you have to look across the border or look over to the United States, or, you know, that's not part of who we are. If you want to be Scottish, it's about that male working class voice. I mean, I'm from working class, well, I don't know what class we are now, but, you know, but you're not going to see yourself. This is not what Scottishness is. That's not what Scottishness looks like. And so I think when I wrote The Drift, it felt like there was a moment, like I was like putting my Scottish mixed race experience on stage, and it felt, I suppose, and I suppose that's why I'm quite autobiographical in my work, because I remember what it was to sit and watch play after play after play, be excited, recognize and having stuff resonating with you about being Scottish, but also going, but I'm not, but they don't mean me. Like I feel that I see that, but they don't mean me.
Have you, and that's interesting because you're doing something different from the things you saw growing up, and have you, is it a fight, or is it difficult to get this stuff on stage, to get it commissioned? I'm not talking about the responses of the audience. I want to ask you about those, but just is it a bit of a act of persuasion, or, you know, is it still considered a little bit risky? And are we going to get an audience for this, because you are doing something that goes that's actually fairly new in terms of tradition?
I mean, I feel I mean, I've been incredibly lucky. I have been. I mean, there's a wonderful company called the Workers Theatre who started did a megaphone residency. They crowdfunded to get some money together for artists of colour to create a piece of work. I used that to further the drift. And the National Theatre of Scotland, Anna at the National Theatre of Scotland saw it, and I got kind of, so I've been really lucky, and my journey's been quite short. So in some ways I'm like, well, no, I didn't. But then I think, but I'm 42 and I'm an emerging playwright. So I know that when I was at the Traverse Young Writers, I loved it. But then when I got a chance to put a play on, I was working 4 jobs, forgot to go to one of the rehearsals and had the play taken away and was told, that's it, you can't, you know, because there was a sense that, so I've had moments where I wanted to go to drama college when I was 17 and was sort of told, well, someone like you will never get any work in theatre, so think about TV, or, you know, like, or this is not for you. So I had a lot of moments where all I ever wanted to do was work in theatre from as a kid. I was the one that theatre, it was my absolute love. But I made a decision at 17 where I thought, oh, this ain't my world. So it took me a long time to get back. Now I've got back, I've been really fortunate, but that's me. And I know there's a lot of other women of colour and a lot of people of colour who do struggle to get their work out there, and for a variety of different reasons. And I think one of the biggest reasons is the fact that, you know, there's it's very difficult to know, because Scotland is small, I suppose, and maybe we don't know how to make those connections with people. We don't know, and we haven't gone to the right places. So there's a lot of things, and I think there's a lot of, you know, there's some really great work the National Theatre of Scotland are doing about breaking barriers and bringing people in and doing different, and I think there is a real appetite to change. I don't know, I mean, I think, so I do feel like I don't want to use my example as being like, oh, actually I've been really fortunate, but and I suppose it's the thing about being a woman, it's also taken me, I had a decade where I had children, so I, you know.
Yes, absolutely. And nobody really talks about that, because, you know, that's considered your personal choice, but you pay for it, so there's a price to pay. And because, you know, Hannah, you mentioned sort of diversity, inclusivity, whatever, you know, sort of rather annoying name we want to give it, but in terms of seeing, you know, yourself and the whole sort of spectrum of you know, our worlds on stage, on the Scottish stage, but, you know, beyond that, Ellie and Katie, do you feel it's changed markedly? You know, I keep reading articles about how well the theatre's doing for inclusivity, and all these programs that are coming into play for diversity and inclusivity, and being, you know, having colourblind cast. And I just wonder what you feel about it. You're on the ground, you're seeing it in a way that, you know, I'm reading about it and reporting it. But what do you see changing? Have things changed, and are you pleased by the change, Ellie?
I can only really speak about the gender disparity, I suppose, in any detail. But the statistic that I always come back to when people ask, you know, why is this a problem, you know, or are there really fewer plays by women on national stages, is that in 2018 only 26% of new main stage plays were by women in the UK. And I mean, that's just diabolical, isn't it? And it means that the theatre is doing worse in that respect than almost any other industry, which seems wrong. And I do believe that schemes and programs and so on are extremely important and have a real function in, like, grassroots and in development and stuff. But actually, it's the decision-making powers that need to change and be educated to give chances, you know, to program this work, and to, I guess, put their money where their mouth sometimes is. I mean, sometimes their mouth isn't even there, but that's my view. Anyway.
That's a very dire, that's very depressing statistic.
Yeah, and I don't know what it now is. I mean, as we come out of the pandemic, it may well be better, but I fear that it may also be worse as theatres feel a pressure to make safe choices, and safe can sometimes come to mean the way things have been done before, or, you know, tradition.
Thanks. Katie?
I was going to say that I feel like two things. One, I think we exist in quite a trend based industry that, and particularly what you're saying, Hannah, around like conversations, and everyone gets really riled up about conversations, and then stuff happens and then things dissipate. And I think like at the moment there's this like fear of like, oh, we're in a trend of like everyone really holding like diversity at the forefront of their thinking. And then what I get nervous about is then when people get busy and like audiences are dipping away and funding starts to become problematic, and we start to really like get that fear. And I think that always comes down to the people that are then essentially running the spaces that make the decisions and about what they're holding and what those values are. There's a huge disparity. I like, you know, I feel like there's also a space in which, great, we're getting more and more exciting, brilliant writers and putting them on stage, but it goes way beyond that. So then how do we look after those productions? How do we look after our creatives? How are we holding, like we have a responsibility, like when we go, great, we've got this amazing diverse work on stage. Well, who's seeing that? And who feels that they're welcome? And what are those barriers that exist for people?
Oh, we've lost Katie.
Sorry,
I think. Oh, you're back. Yeah.
I'm back. Sorry. Yeah. I was just saying, like, what are those barriers? And if we're sat there going, oh, wow, how brilliant, we've done so well, we've got this amazing piece of work, and whatever that piece of work is, and it's not, you know, and those audiences are not speaking, that work is not speaking to the audiences that it deserves to be speaking to, then that's a problem. There's a huge amount of work that we have to do. And we're certainly doing a lot of internal reflection on that at Plough. We absolutely can't sit there going, we're getting everything right, because we're not, but we're really aware of that because it's just so much more. And the sad truth is during COVID, we've lost an extraordinary amount of amazing artists, and we will continually do so. And there is a scary part, and I am very much an optimist. I do generally, like, I do live my life through a kind of like positivity and in times of adversity, but I do get really nervous of that feeling of going, gosh, like more and more people will start to just go, actually, this talk of change is compromised, and so what's my place in it? So I think we all have to do a lot of work beyond just what goes on our stages.
I think great points. Go for it, Hannah.
No, I was just, when I was reflecting, I was just thinking about how much also what we have to do is allow artists to be artists. I think there's this thing, I think especially last year, where you know, suddenly every artist of color, or you know, you were suddenly had to become a politician, or you suddenly had to, then every single story. So every time you get a chance to do something, it's not, can't just tell the story that you want to say, or where you have to tell everybody's story everywhere, and everyone has to be, and this huge pressure, and you think, and I think women are the same. It's like, oh, you're telling this, that you now have to, you can't just be your piece of art, it has to be everything, you have to represent everything, it has to be, and there's this, and I just long for the day where you just get to just make a piece of work because it's the piece of, and for it to be as your piece of work, not as a, you know, as a kind of a marker of success, and or did you bring in the audience, and art, you know, we've, you know, just this whole pressure on artists from the margins to suddenly fix all the problems and get to be a playwright, or get to be an art, you know, just get to have the freedom of doing where your I was going to say where your muse takes you, but then that makes me sound like an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, and I think there's such a, isn't it? There's such a feeling that, and I imagine you think this with the prize as well. It's like, you know, how do you want to create a prize to support women, but it's also about allowing for this to be the freedom of the work within that, not to be like sitting meeting some sort of kind of
manifesto or something.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
And I guess that's why we've always sort of, well, see, we talk a lot about this, but we don't ever want to sort of go, oh, you're writing specifically for this theatre, or it doesn't have any boundaries around what it could be, which then hopefully then provides more of a kind of openness, as opposed to someone perhaps going, oh, okay, I know this is going to be on at the Traverse or whatever the Bush. Does that start to kind of cement maybe, yeah, some of your choices.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we have a sort of general inquiries email address, of course, and so many of the questions from writers are along the lines of, so can I really write whatever I like? Yeah. It doesn't have to be about anything or for anyone. And I always just reply, yes, it's just like total freedom. But they seem to think that there will be a prescription or as you say, Arifa, a manifesto of some kind that they have to adhere to.
Yeah, and Caitlin, I know that you know you've done you know, some research and campaigning work, but I just wonder about what you think of, you know, these apparent transformation of the stage and changes and, you know, inclusivity and the rest of it.
Yeah, so you know, the story of Stella Quines was it started in the 90s with a bunch of women who weren't getting parts. So they started a theatre company and had plays that were written by women with women in them. And all this time later, the company is still going and holds quite a established position within the theatre ecology. And actually really interesting seeing that conversation about how useful it is to have a space to not have to hold the politics of everything as an artist and to be able to follow your own interests. And I think that's absolutely the way that Stella Quines has approached its work for a long time. But actually now we are embracing that idea of intersectional feminism more, and the company's evolving. And actually now I think the question for us is about, okay, let the other theatres are the places where artists can be artists and talk to audience in that way. And what Stella Quines is trying to do is trying to have that three-dimensional approach to creating change, not just in the industry, but in the world. And how do we really deliver on that idea of intersectionality, on the way that gender inequality interacts with other things? So I think the big thing for me now is about, okay, we're not, and I don't want to just talk about representation, actually. I want to talk about love. That sounds really airy-fairy, but it's not just about being present, it's about an industry that really loves everyone who's in it and allows them to make art in that way. And I think for me, you know, I'm going through a big Audre Lorde phase at the moment. Amazing American feminist. She talks about, you know, the master's tools will never destroy the master's house. And so that's why we have this broad program, which isn't just about putting on shows, but is about campaigning. It's about career development, about how we make work, how we develop ourselves, how we run organizations, and the work we put on stage and how we take that to audiences, because that has been driven by the patriarchy for centuries and change across the board, not just by having different people within it.
Sure, yeah. There's so much to unpick here already, but actually we've got a question coming in, and it's a couple of questions actually, and I want to ask those questions. Before I do, I'm just very greedily shoehorning in a couple of my own before I go to audience questions. And one of them, I just wonder whether, you know, given the disparities, whether and budgets and budget constraints, you know, whether I suppose this is for you, Hannah, when you write something, whether it really has got that in mind, you know, small casts, because you're somehow aware that it's sort of harder for some people than others, and it might be easier and quicker to get a smaller play, smaller cast on with a smaller budget. Do you ever think like that, or is that not how you write?
I mean, I think because I began making spoken word shows, I was doing it just myself, and I even bought one of those flickers so I could work the projector from my own set design at the same time as performing.
Oh, wow.
DIY, I think there's probably still a part of me that creates plays going, well, if no one wants to do it, I could just hire the back room of a pub and
put it on myself.
But no, I mean, I think I'm very early on in my career, as in my commissions that I'm getting at the moment are still, you know, are for smaller casts, you know, like I've just finished a one women's show of Jekyll and Hyde, and so I mean I'm keen to sort of think, but I think maybe I do. I mean, I don't know whether that's just me as an artist. My stories feel always quite like I probably don't think more about 3 or 4 people on stage, because maybe that's what I like, and I don't know what that says a bit. But yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, if I get a commission, I'll work within the parameters I'm given. So sometimes I feel like these, maybe the question of people that commission me to think whether, why isn't, maybe I will get a commission when they say, right, actually, and I'm lucky at the moment that I've been given the Adopt a Playwright Award. And I know that I, speaking to Diane and Sophia, they're like, just push it. Like, how you can have as many casts as you want. And I'm still going, I've got 3 people maybe. I'm not, I think maybe it's gone inside me that I'm not allowed to think beyond.
Yeah. Interesting. And I also, Katie, you touched on diversity within the audience. We can have as much diversity as we like on stage. Who's actually seeing and consuming and bonding, connecting with the work? That's something I want to ask, but actually, I'll just leave it hovering sorry, because I want to come to just a few questions that have been waiting here a while. And one is from Anne Cameron, who says, hello, I'm a director, writer and actress listening from France. Hi, Anne, sorry. Could you explain a bit in what way shows artists have been impacted over the last year and a half? So for instance, why are you doing a stage reading and not proper shows? And what about rehearsals too? So how's it affected you in the last year and a half? Because you've all been working on these productions in the last year and a half.
Well, I think I can answer why stage readings and not proper shows, and that's to do with mitigating risk. I think we want things to keep happening, but the situation with the pandemic has been, it's been extremely unpredictable at all times. So one of the ways that we can just keep things moving is by doing things that, enable people to sit a metre apart or stand a metre and a half apart or whatever. And yes, it would be lovely to aim for the full thing straight off, but we wanted to make sure that things could definitely or almost definitely go ahead, and that's why stage readings. But I do think that, and massive touch wood, I do think that we're moving slowly back to doing the fuller.
I was going to just add to that, say that particularly for You Bury Me, bearing in mind that both these winners were announced in December. One obviously was straight away to be produced in terms of that sort of happened fortuitously with slots and stuff like that. But programme of theatre is obviously quite far in advance. So the fact that You Bury Me has a stage reading, we've had a 10-day rehearsal period. We're working really hard to really get to the joy and all the kind of exploration of the text, that it will feel really full. And I guess with the hope and recognition that also then is the start of its journey and its future life in order to be made into the production that it deserves to be made into in the next, however, hopefully by next year. So it's we see those stage readings as great opportunities, particularly for Edinburgh International Festival. The fact that we will hopefully that work will get seen by a lot of people, and that feels like a great space for the writer, also for the producers that are part of that conversation. So I don't think they're instead of, they're mostly about the kind of journey and going how we find those opportunities. And as I said, with You Bury Me, this is a play that's been read by a lot of people that have, given great feedback and have really enjoyed it, but, they haven't programmed it. And I'm going, man, you've missed out, because we will. And that's great. So and that's what the prize has done so brilliantly, but also that's the space of going, what was theatre pre-pandemic? What is it now? What are people prepared to do?
Yeah. We've just lost Katie again. Katie, can you hear us? No, we've lost you for a minute, but I'm sure you'll be back in. Yeah, you're back. Yeah, so in a way, you're saying that are you saying that there's a bit of a silver lining in the sense that the pandemic might have slowed down production, but actually it can be an invitation to almost, expand the process, so that, because you'd never normally do a stage reading and then a staging, would you normally? Perhaps you would.
Yeah, maybe it depends on what that is. When it's more about time frame, to be honest, and everyone's producing budgets and how things can get on really quickly. My friends who don't work in the industry think it's hilarious that we're all thinking like 2, 3, 5 years ahead. They're like, what's wrong with you? So it's like, how can we be responsive quite quickly? So I guess stage readings in this capacity is really great. I think the danger is there is this sort of thought that, oh, well, we've done a stage reading, oh, wasn't that great? And that play just kind of sits dormant. So I guess like if that's held in the right hands with the intent and the focus on wanting to see that to a full production,
right,
that feels really fruitful.
Yeah,
we obviously, it just depends on what the situation is.
Sure. And I just want to come to Caitlin and Hannah before we go to another question that's come.
I'll go. Sorry, Caitlin.
Yeah.
I mean, Lament for Goodbye started as a rehearsed reading at the International Festival. And I like, to be honest, I find that process really important, the rehearsed reading stage, and now it's going to production. I feel like it needed that. And it's a really, I think it's a really valuable way to test the script. So I mean, I've directed this piece, and, you know, doing that with social distancing and everything else with Lament has been really difficult and tough, and trying to create a piece that was made, you know, written to be experienced with the live audience, and suddenly have to find a way of working that digitally. It's all, I mean, we've been kind of all of us, the whole world have obviously been thrown into finding new ways to make work and to keep things going. I don't know if that completely answers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's been a learning, isn't it? It's all learning, playing actually. And I feel like the more as artists we get opportunities to play and test things out, and not to have the, not to always kind of, you know, what is that? Feel like you're in the arena. Sometimes just side of it for a bit.
Yeah. And Caitlin?
I'm thinking about this idea. So yeah, I think during the pandemic, that's exactly it. We found other ways to play, other ways to read. I'm quite interested in that. Like, I heard someone talking who was from the tech sector. Apologies to anyone in the audience who's actually from the tech sector. Not correct. But in the tech sector, there's a way of thinking which is much more like when you're testing a new project, the longer it stays away from its eventual user, the worse it gets. And as Katie says, plays take quite a long time to develop because they're so expensive to make, and we don't get the income coming in for tickets, and especially if you're working on new plays like we are. So we often have this idea where the play kind of goes away and we hide it away from people, and it doesn't come out until it's ready. But actually there's something about the pandemic and this way of working where you do one iteration of it in front of an audience, and then you learn, and then you do another, and you develop. That I really like that way of working. I like being able to take it to an audience in different stages before the full production, rather than just kind of hiding it all away, because I think that's a play comes to life in front of an audience. How do you know what it is until
I mean, I think that from being a poet, like from being a poet, that's the thing. I'll write a poem on Tuesday and I'll get up on Wednesday night in front of an audience and go, oh no, it never worked. I'm just forget that one. And I love, that's why I suppose I kind of enjoy this rehearsed reading part of, because it feels like that same way of doing spoken word. We're like, does it work? No, it doesn't work. Or that maybe here. And yeah, I mean, I love doing that.
Yeah, great. Listen, we've got I've been instructed that we've got 4 minutes left, sadly, and now we've got real tons of questions coming in. So I'm issuing apologies to people who patiently waited, and now we can't see to them all. I'll ask a couple. Can we quick fire answers? Is that all right? Sorry to rush everyone, but I want to get through to. So a couple of questions from Rosie Castle. She says, feel free to answer whichever interests you more. Where do you get your inspiration from? Do you ever collaborate with other writers? And if so, how have you found this? Producers, what jumps out at you when choosing to produce a play? What would put you off? So there's a lot of questions there. Does anyone want to just answer? Let's take two of them. Anyone? So.
Okay, I'll go with where'd you get inspiration from?
Yeah.
Everywhere. Just keep your eyes open, I suppose. That's kind of, and I love collaborating with other writers and with other people. And I've just done a project with Sarah McGilvery, which was just joyous. And and also when I work with 13 Fragments, I love being in a room. I was in a room with lots of wonderful women, and I would
Fantastic. Okay, we're going to move on now because nobody's jumped in quick enough. How have actors survived in Scotland and Britain?
It's been really, really hard. Yeah, I mean, actors are amazing, and they had experience of having perhaps periods of no work. So lots of people hugely resilient, taking on other jobs, doing bits and bobs. But we've also lost a lot of people, and they've just had to, they've had to leave the industry, and that's a massive loss. It's a precarious profession anytime financially. So the pandemic's been horrific.
Awful. There's one final question. It's quite long, so let's get our heads around it. We've got 2 minutes. So it's an anonymous question. I have a question. This question is based on working recently for a national organisation where the commission balance was over 66% female. The production rate was about 75% female, and this person is female. But this doesn't seem common amongst my peers. Where specifically is the problem elsewhere? It seems to me it must be how dramaturgs and commissioners are positioned in organisations. The majority of dramaturgs and literary managers are female. So what's happening in between? This person's asking. Who is the problem here? We're talking about it as if it's the building or the company, but you know, this is a really interesting question that we've got 30 seconds to answer. Caitlin?
Yeah, I mean, you see it in the other industries, not ours, right? And we've got lots of women down the bottom of the industry, and then the further up you go, there's less women. And we also have a lot of women in those producing roles, in those literary management roles, which is kind of a supporting role for the lead artist. And that's because being lead artist is precarious. It's not financially sustainable for a lot of your career. So it's not really about, and it's also, so it's not just about there's a man at the top who's saying no. It's also about our biases around what is good work actually often is a male voice. It's about can you come to rehearsals? Well, no, I can't, I've got children. It's about, like, have you had the education? Like, are you supporting a family? It's about, like, we have a perfectionist idea, we have a sense of urgency in our industry, we have this big thing about, we have stresses on us which are actually really patriarchal and aren't accessible and open to everyone. It's massive. The world is oppressive and discriminatory. It's so the world, so it's multiple.
Caitlin, I take my hat off to you because that was really eloquently put within a minute long. So that's really well done. So listen, very frustratingly, we've come to the end of the line, but this conversation has been full of richness and humor and intelligence and wisdom, and I've really enjoyed it. So thank you, Ellie Kiel, Katie Posner, Hannah Lavery, Caitlin Skinner. I hope to talk to you again about this also, because we can carry on talking, but it's been marvelous talking to you this morning about it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Arifa.
Thank you, everybody.
And goodbye, everyone.
Bye.